if we get people to trust their building heat and their cars and their industrial processes to electricity instead of molecules, and then the power system isn't, reliable, and in storms and extreme weather events take it out, then that bargain is going to kind of break down, right? People are going to say, wait a second, why did we sign up for that? And if you look at this country and our percent of power lines, both transmission and distribution, that are undergrounded versus, say, Europe, we are, I think the stat is at around 20% undergrounded, 80% above ground, and in Europe it's almost flipped. And so that obviously in extreme weather, whether that's wildfires, in the west or hurricanes in the east, that needs to change in a world where we're more and more dependent on electricity for our power needs. And so we've launched this program, Gophers, that is working on cheap. And so why aren't more power lines underground? It's just so expensive. So how do you make that cheaper with high speed directional drilling for trenchless undergrounding? Different kinds of ground, penetrating radar and other technologies that enable you to steer or direct a drill, from above ground and know where all of the, other buried infrastructure is, so that you can move those drills fast. And if we can really crack that, then, we can get a much less expensive power line undergrounding. And that would be like a big, huge accomplishment.
Welcome to the Zenergy Podcast. I'm your host, Karan Takhar, and in today's episode, I will be speaking with Jon Glass, Senior Technology to Market Advisor at ARPA-E. We discuss his role at ARPA-E, what drew him to this work, and how ARPA-E supports early-stage companies in bridging the gap to commercialization. Jon shares insights into ARPA-E's process, the role of private sector advisors, and some unconventional innovations they've championed. We also explore the intersection of AI and climate tech, career lessons Jon has learned, and his advice for young investors. Enjoy this insightful conversation with Jon Glass, and don't forget to subscribe and follow us on social media. Thank you. Hello, Jon. It is wonderful to have you on the podcast. Thank you so much for taking the time. And I don't think ARPA-E really needs much of an introduction, but just to be safe for those listeners who might not be super familiar with the ARPA-E office within the DOE, could you please provide a quick overview what your role is in the agency, and also how the opportunity came about to ultimately work at ARPA-E?
Absolutely, Karan, and thanks for having me. It's awesome to be here in New York during Climate Week, and as we were just talking, glad I've kept my voice on day 4 of Climate Week. So I am a senior advisor for commercialization at ARPA-E. For the past year, I've been the deputy director for commercialization with the agency. I'm now transitioning out of that role as I go into kind of my final year of service at the agency, and we've just brought in a new deputy for commercialization. Super quickly on ARPA-E, we are the Department of Energy's transformative energy technology R&D funding arm. So we go into the super difficult but really important white spaces across the energy spectrum, all the way from precision agriculture to fusion and everywhere in between, new grid software and hardware, new generation technologies, new power electronic technologies, new mining and geothermal and low carbon cement, and pretty much everything you can imagine. We are a funding agency, so we fund universities. Those are about half the teams we fund. Startups, corporate R&D, national labs to the tune of little under $500 million a year in funding. The reason I have a job, and about 20 of my colleagues do at ARPA-E in the tech to market, the commercialization side, is because when Congress stood us up, somewhat modeled on the DARPA model at the Department of Defense, the realization was that at the Department of Energy, there's not a natural, within the department, a downstream customer for the technologies we're funding. So Congress wanted to make sure we're not funding technology for technology's sake and that what we fund doesn't start and end in the lab. So the agency formed a tech to market team to make sure we act kind of as nagging parent, personal trainer, working with our project teams to make sure they are thinking about the month 37 problem. If an ARPA-E project lasts 36 months, 3 years typically, what happens to make sure that technology keeps going, gets out into the wild, out into markets at the end of a ARPA-E funded project.
Really look forward to diving into that process. But before getting there, could you just provide some insight into how the actual opportunity to work at ARPA-E came about? Because I think that would be a really interesting way to kick off this conversation.
Yeah, great. So 2 ways to answer that. One is that our federal employees in the agency are term limited. So whether you're a tech to market advisor or a program director at ARPA-E, you come in on a 3-year term as part of a government special hiring authority. The point being is that there are opportunities, and we are continually cycling folks into the agency. So I think that's something worth mentioning for listeners. And if anything we talk about today sparks interest, definitely go to our career site. So I was working immediately prior to ARPA-E at the corporate VC arm of National Grid, which is an investor-owned utility based out of the UK, has utility and energy businesses both in the UK and in the US. And there we were standing up and had launched, as part of a group called National Grid Partners, a new corporate VC arm and innovation arm. Along the way, I started working with folks from ARPA-E, now my colleagues, who wanted to engage people like me at a utility on different projects for new automated relining of existing in situ pipes for say our gas utility, or undergrounding of power lines. Like the people a lot. And it was just the right time in my life. I'd never served in public service in the public sector before, and I, like the people I was working with at National Grid, and I said, "Hey, this tech to market role feels like a really good fit for my background." And in 2022, I came aboard.
That's amazing. And what inspired your interest to operate at this really interesting intersection of energy and investing and helping early stage companies? Does that go way back, or is that a more recent interest that's developed?
I'd say it's a little of both. And as someone I worked with a long time ago, a senior executive at GE, once said, it's like your career only looks elegant in hindsight. And I think that's definitely true for me. I came out of business school back in the late 90s, joined GE and GE Equity, which was GE's corporate VC arm back then. Worked on a wide range of technologies, a lot in telecoms and enterprise software and media. But we did actually have one of the early, I don't know if it was Clean Tech 1.0 or even 0.0, but in the late 90s had built a portfolio that in the early 2000s I had the chance to sort of lead that team and work on that portfolio. So I did get involved in clean tech like
early.
A long time ago.
That's so cool.
It's such a different world.
I feel like that's unique in terms of like operating in the space for such a long period.
Well, no, it's a good point. Although it was like, a different world, the economics, no one was talking about wind being cheaper than, nuclear, natural gas, coal, or solar for that matter.
Interesting.
I mean, there were no solar rooftop, solar leasing models that existed at that time. So these were like things we knew there was a problem and a need for clean tech with greenhouse gas emissions. But I think the pathway to commercial viability was like, way on the horizon and like a lot of fog in between here and there back then.
That makes a lot of sense. And yeah, I think just having like that long-term perspective, being able to reflect back from your early experiences to then seeing the industry grow till it is now, is a perspective that I personally, and also a lot of listeners, would probably be really inspired to hear more about.
Yeah. So, I think what's important about it, and by the way, I bring that up because in the early 2000s, I was working and frankly was probably in way over my head and didn't know nearly enough in the space. And then was working at GE in a number of areas. I went off and worked with like GE's commercial finance business to help launch an interest rate derivatives business, totally like different things. Was at GE's licensing arm, working on licensing a whole range of technologies. So I kind of was, still touching a little bit the clean tech space, but not like living and breathing it for probably a good decade. But going back to your point, it's sometimes easy to be pessimistic about all of the challenges ahead on the energy transition. And I think we can all sometimes fall into like, wow, there's so much to be done. It's so hard to permit things, transmission lines takes, 6 to 10 years just to get started for a new project. But then when you think about like what I was mentioning a minute ago that, you just commented on, we have come a long way. A lot of progress has been made. So that is pretty inspiring. Who would think you'd talk about, negatively priced wholesale power during certain times of the day, given just wind or solar generation? That is pretty amazing.
So true. And now circling back to your current work with ARPA-E, which in itself has played a pretty crucial role in helping get these technologies to a level where they are commercially viable. And would love to dive into some specific areas that ARPA-E is currently invested in. But before doing so, could you just provide a little bit more of an overview in terms of like when in a startup's journey ARPA-E gets involved, and like how you look at the role that ARPA-E plays in a startup's journey? Is it like a coach?
Sure. I'm going to maybe reframe the question a little bit, which is to say we fund, as I mentioned earlier, a whole range of awardee types, right? Ranging from academics at universities to startups to corporate R&D labs, like where I used to be, in G's and G's research labs, to national labs. So I think the way to think about it, though, whether if you're a startup or potentially, at an academic institution, and maybe you're a PhD student or a postdoc, but you have more of the entrepreneurial bug than you do have the academic bug, and are looking for opportunities to be part of a spin out from a university, the answer would kind of be the same. Our role, and we do this primarily through technology-focused programs. So we pick a area that's really difficult and probably too risky for private enterprise, private capital to start funding technology in a loan. So let's say it's different challenges in commercializing fusion, or let's say it's floating offshore wind platforms, or cheaper, better, faster for undergrounding power lines, or new forms of, new ultra wide band gap materials for, enabling the solid state grid. So we pick tough technology areas, and our role is to fund the research. Say we put $40 million into a technology, we commit that to a technology-focused program. We then do a proposal call, a solicitation. In ARPA-E and DOE speak, that's called a FOA, a funding opportunity announcement. So that goes out, and then proposers, across the gamut, send back concept papers and full applications, and we select ultimately, say, 10 to 15 teams and then award them. So if you're a startup, I think what I would recommend is keeping your eyes and ears open to what ARPA-E is doing. And that means not just waiting for us to, on our funding opportunity page, which you should be checking to see, ARPA-E just launched a funding opportunity announcement for phytomining, which is something we recently did. Which I'll be happy to explain what that is. But even better yet is look at, and the good news is this is government, so we try to make all of this as visible and accessible and transparent to all taxpayers. Look at who are the ARPA-E program directors, because they are the ones who ultimately are, they are the technology leaders of our organization, and read the bios and get to know, who is the expert in the area that your startup is focused on. This is the thermophotovoltaic or the energy storage expert. This is the mining expert. This is this person is focused on geothermal technologies or subsurface technologies. Find those program directors and reach out to them directly. It may take a little hustle or shoe leather or whatever you want to call it. But build a relationship with those program directors, because the reason this is a benefit, and this is frankly what successful proposers do, is they understand what programs those program directors might be thinking about. A program director might say, I'm thinking about a program in area X. We're actually going to have a workshop on it to sort of figure out what matters, what key metrics could be, how we might structure this program. You ought to come. And so you can really start to understand. Yeah, you can start that conversation program. Because once we launch a solicitation, we go into a quiet period for, government procurement and contracting rules. So you can't talk then. So the idea is build relationships early.
That makes a lot of sense. So in the lead up to actually launching the FOA, like in general, how long is the process to putting out the FOA from the initial ideation stage, in terms of like, we know we need to find some proposals in this program area. And then ultimately getting to the FOA stage, like what is the window generally that companies have or that academics have to be able to reach out to ARPA-E?
It's typically, the cute answer is never short enough. Certainly if you talk to our program directors. But in certain cases that has moved really quickly, kind of measured in more weeks to, single digit months. In other cases, it might be up to a year.
Got it.
There are precursors before we launch a program. We hold workshops, both with, where we invite industry and academics. We likely will put out an RFI where we just ask for input through a written document. And those are, at the ARPA-E annual innovation summit, our program directors do fast pitches, which is it's a leading indicator of what they're thinking about. So if you'd been, for instance, at ARPA-E's summit in 2022, there was a fast pitch on geologic hydrogen that ended up being a program that we've now launched.
I see.
Got
it. No, super helpful context. And my last question on this thread, if a company doesn't participate prior to the release of an FOA, is there still a good chance that they can ultimately receive an award for ARPA-E, or is it more so the participation before the release of the FOA in a way shows their interest, helps kind of shape the program in a way that they have the requirements to be able to provide value to what ARPA-E is looking for, etc.?
So there certainly are. There are many instances where an awardee wasn't involved early on, but just submitted a great proposal and had the technical chops to back it up and got awarded. So it's not as if you haven't engaged leading up to the launch of that FOA, it's not as if you're disqualified, not at all. And you can still propose and get awarded. I mean, there's a team that comes to mind, Antora, out in the Bay Area, where they were awarded I think literally 4 folks in a garage. And they were awarded under our program called DAYS, which is a clever acronym. It's a long duration energy storage program that launched, I think, back in 2019. It's pretty much wrapped up now.
DAYS?
DAYS. As in, I think it's duration addition for electricity storage. The Y is from electricity.
Love that.
It's a little bit of a cheat on the electricity where the Y comes from. But anyway, so I think when I was talking to the founders at Antora, they were telling me that they had no engagement. And they were like, hey, this FOA came out. Well, we're working on thermophotovoltaics, and we have some interesting ideas around thermal energy storage. Yeah, let's propose. And they got awarded.
Amazing.
And more recently, we've awarded them an even bigger amount in a program ARPA-E has called Scale Up. And don't ask me to tell you what that acronym is, but the name says it all.
Whoever's coming up with these terms deserves employee of the month or something like that.
Yeah, it's I think the internal term we use is acronaming. And just so slight side note, when a PD gets approved by our director of the agency for a new program, then one of the honors is allowing the acronaming to kick off. And so internal email goes out and it's like, okay, I've been approved for program X. Send me your best acronyms. And then the emails start flying. And the creativity is like, it's way beyond me. But
that's the first question in a job interview with ARPA-E.
Exactly. Right.
Tell us a creative acronym. Go.
Exactly. Yeah. If that had been the case, I don't think I would have been hired. So just to back on Antora. Yeah. So I believe that they put in a cold proposal. They got awarded, and then just back in June, we announced them as one of our selectees for our most recent cohort of Scale Up, which is bigger funding amounts to kind of cross that second valley of death, that initial productization and initial, the technology works, but how do you really start the, honest to God commercialization of it? And so we're now funding them for that commercialization of their thermophotovoltaic technology to really scale it up. So, I mean, that's an example.
Got it.
Yeah.
That's very helpful context. Thank you for expanding on how the process works for me.
Can I make one other point
for
a startup? So there's often, especially with academic teams, there's a debate of, okay, how should the technology be commercialized? Should it be licensed to an incumbent industry player, for a 3% royalty license or something like that? Or should it be licensed to a startup, and a spin out who's now going to commercialize it? There's also a third path, though. This ties back to startups, which is so usually people think about those are the two choices, but there's a third choice, which is there could be a startup or a smaller player that has adjacent technology but is looking to augment it. And maybe there's an academic team, and it's going to be a real hard slog to commercialize that to a big existing player. But there might be a startup that is a perfect fit where kind of like a 1 + 1 equals
So you
3.
license directly to the startup.
So you could license to that startup. And I'm doing some work in the grid optimization software area. And we have several teams we have some teams who are spinning out of universities with their software, but we have other ones where they're probably not going to go that route, but they are getting traction with existing smaller companies and startups. So that's another, if you're a startup, like to keep your eyes open to who's getting funded at ARPA-E. And there might be a university team that would respond really well if you said, hey, we like what you're doing. Would you be open to working with us to commercialize it?
So interesting. Yeah, I feel like I would not have thought of that pathway as one of the other two are self-explanatory, but thank you for expanding on that. And regarding how ARPA-E assesses which early stage companies have the most potential to bridging the gap from bold research, because a lot of these projects are extremely technical in areas that there aren't other projects to really point to. So how do you and the ARPA-E team look at what as the most potential to actually commercialize?
So I'm going to answer that in two ways.
Please do.
There's
more the merrier.
The first way to think about it is for a technology focused program, the bread and butter, if you will, of what we fund. And right now we have probably 50 some odd in process. Maybe they're towards the end, maybe they're just launching technology focused programs. For that, the FOA, the FOA, has very detailed metrics on what we're looking for out of the technologies that get developed. And most of the application and most of the project work is going to be focused on technology development and in the lab. And that's where, if you get awarded, most of your milestones. The other thing to remember is we're not just giving grant funding. These are cooperative research agreements, research contracts with the US government. And most of the milestones in that contract are going to be delivering on technical
performance metrics.
Exactly. But, and this actually by statute, 5 or more percent of the project does have to be commercially focused. And so what we do look for is in the proposal, how is the team, and if it's a startup or a existing corporate R&D lab, you're going to answer that question differently than if you're a university team. But we do look for what is your plan, what are potential milestones, how are you thinking about taking this technology to market, and those will then be the basis for the tech to market milestones that end up, should you get selected and awarded in the go to market
next phase.
Yeah. So all right, maybe how do I boil that one down? We're looking for proposers, whether academic, startup, big companies, that in their proposal show how they're going to engage with the value chain, related to that technology. How are they going to be thinking about forming industry advisory boards? How do they talk about doing a techno-economic analysis in there? And do they have the right skill sets to be able to do that successfully? And are they thinking about it? And those are, I think, things we're looking for in a proposal. So that was answer one. But answer two is in scale up, that subsequent program. So scale up, the eligible proposers for scale up have to be a commercial entity that the subject IP has to be funded by ARPA-E originally, but it now has to be in or controlled by a commercial entity. So let's say a university originally developed the technology. Now it has to be licensed to some commercial entity. Mm-hmm. In that, we look a lot deeper at the commercial plan, as mm-hmm. you might imagine. Mm-hmm. And that's in the merit review weighting. The commercial prospects are 33% of the weighting of what we review. Technical merits are 33%, commercial merits are 33%, and then team is 33%.
So you can kind of 5 to 10% in the previous phase.
Right. So the original funding is really technology focused, but we want to see there's a mindset thinking about that month 37. In scale up, you have to be thinking about who are my commercial partners. You have to be thinking, the team. We look really hard at who the team is. Do you have the ability mm-hmm. to raise funding? It becomes do you really understand the market space you play in, and who your competitors are, who your channels to market are? If you're proposing something into the utility space, do you understand the utility business model, which is a different model mm-hmm. than a typical, as a regulated monopoly, and how they make purchase decisions. So in scale up, it's almost like we play a quasi VC investment committee role because we're looking at a real demonstrated commercial understanding and a management team that can execute.
That makes a lot of sense. So I have a few questions as it pertains to both scale up and then the initial program. We'll start with the initial program. What's the name of it exactly? The program that's not scale up?
Oh, those are all of the different.
Okay,
so that could be Days, Propel 1K, Minor, Rosie. These are the super creative acronyms.
But there's no bucket that the programs fall under, or like a phase, or
no, they don't. So one other thing worth pointing out is, and I don't think many organizations would say this, but we do, and it's relevant for us, is we operate as an agency that doesn't have a roadmap, a technology roadmap. That is to say, program directors come up with ideas where there are really hard but really important technology white spaces to crack. And that's part of the hiring process for an ARPA-E program director, is like, what concepts do you have? And they actually pitch a program idea. Those then become the basis of those technology focus, some 50 of which are active right now for us. And that's, the bulk of where our annual funding is going. Then there's scale up. There's also, we do every 3 years launch an open call, which is just send us your best ideas. Uh-huh. And that's like a way to hoover up anything uh-huh. that, the timing might not have been right to get into one of those technology focused programs, or we just never launched a program in this area, but it's like an amazing idea.
Got it. Okay. So firstly, that is a really cool way to go about it, where you hire program directors and then the onus is essentially on them to come up with these new areas that require a lot of technical, hard-hitting research to ultimately develop a technology in order to address those areas.
No, that's right. And it's worth mentioning that our tech to market team is part of that program development process as well, to figure out something we say a lot at the agency is, if it works, will it matter? Mm-hmm. And so our tech to market team, so the program directors bring in the ideas, and then our tech to market team is working on, okay, will it matter? And will this have real impact?
Got it. So what does the process look like to figuring out whether a specific program will matter?
It involves, engaging industry and value chains. potentially, and the range, whether that be startups in a value chain or industry incumbents, investors who fund into that value chain. So we get input from them on, for instance, like the metrics we're looking for a technology to be able to hit. So let's go back to this DAYS program. We talked about long duration energy storage. That was where we developed, and this has actually been, I think, pretty widely adopted across the Department of Energy now, a key metric of 5 cents per kilowatt hour for LCOS, levelized cost of storage. So we got there by talking and engaging with, grid operators and ISOs, and thinking about what do the economics have to be at that unit basis to make long duration energy storage viable. And we put into the program a 5 cent per kilowatt hour requirement.
Tangible.
Yeah.
So you released an RFI to different stakeholders in industry to get, No,
that's right. I mean, it's part of the program development pre-FOA. We're putting out RFIs, and those are published on ARPA-E's funding opportunity webpage, along with the funding opportunity announcements themselves. And that's where we will go both actively, like reach out to certain players to solicit their input, but then also, if you just happen to see it and you're like, well, ARPA-E didn't ask me, but I have thoughts here. Our ears are open for that as well.
So there's an existing portfolio of companies within certain spaces that ARPA-E already has a relationship with that it goes directly to reach out to. I'm just really curious about this because I'm very interested in the intersection of public and private entities. So in some ways, I feel like by really getting clear on how ARPA-E goes about this process to informing what programs it puts out, how it ultimately engages with private sector entities is sort of like a one small micro example that likely is replicated across other agencies, probably not exactly, but just helps provide insight into how it works.
No, you're spot on. And one of my colleagues used, I think this is really effective, like the Bowtie model. And I'll explain what that means. And I do believe it applies beyond just our agency. So we really do think of ourselves as an agency, as a convener. And so what does the bow tie mean? Imagine, okay, so you have the mental image of a wide and then gets narrow and then gets wide again. So, or two funnels back to back. So when we're looking for proposers and when we're ideating and forming a program, we cast a really broad net. We want as many proposers as possible because that's how you get the best ideas. You want 100 proposals coming in and then we ultimately select 10. That's lets the taxpayer fund the best ideas. We also want input as broadly as possible from people in that particular industry sector or value chain. But then as you get ready and you launch the FOA and you get concept papers in, you do a down select, and then you do a down select to the project teams that we ultimately award. So that's like the center of the bow tie, right? And then the projects kick off, and then those teams, each team maybe forms an industry advisory board as the project, maybe that's in year one. In year two, maybe they expand that, or maybe they pull in a entrepreneur in residence from the university to start thinking about some of the tech to market challenges and working on forming a business model. And we're doing annual meetings for each each program. And so we're inviting in industry again. So it's sort of like it's expanding again. And so at the end of a typical RP program, hopefully if we've done our job, those project teams have
really good analogy.
Engaged broadly.
Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And I think, I guess I'd make the broad point now, having been 2+ years, in the Department of Energy. I think, generally the other agencies of, look, we're one of many funding offices, which we can get into if you'd like. I mean, but, the different funding offices and how that all works. I don't know if we have enough time. That's probably like a separate, but, I would say that generally, and I've been really impressed by this, in addition to just, the intelligence and commitment and devotion and passion you see across our department broadly. This idea of conveners, of really wanting to engage the public. You mentioned, how does public and private work together? I mean, I think that mindset is of not secretive government, but transparent, open, wanting to engage, to make this energy transition happen. It has to be. And I think that mindset is super widely shared across DOE.
That's really great to hear. And I do feel like sometimes people give the government flack for being siloed. And for example, you hear this term about how career civil servants ultimately are making all these really important decisions, which might not necessarily be grounded in what's happening in practice. So,
yeah, and I feel from my experience and what I see the other agencies doing, there is this real, as I said, real and not just talk, but a real, genuine, sincere, and making it happen engagement with, the doers that are out there.
Yeah.
I'd mention one resource that's worth looking at, which ARPA-E is not involved in. This comes out of other offices of the DOE. There are these pathways to commercial liftoff. Like, people can just, if you Google like Department of Energy or DOE, pathways to liftoff, these are just incredibly well researched, produced industry reports. I think there's close to 10 that have come out now on different key climate technology, energy technology areas, green hydrogen, enhanced geothermal, long duration energy storage, advanced nuclear, smart grid, industrial decarb. You get the idea. But these are amazing resources, and they try to set sort of like a common level of information and understanding so that an investor, a startup, an ultimate customer are kind of all looking at the same fact base and understanding the same challenges in, say, green hydrogen.
We'll make sure to link those articles in the show notes. Appreciate you mentioning them. And to my previous point, also the fact that ARPA-E has this program where they bring in advisors from the private sector, such as yourself, to then help guide, mentor, shape some of the programs, along with helping companies get to commercialization, also speaks to the fact that there is value placed on having a private sector voice in the agency, which I think isn't really widely acknowledged.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you mentioned that. If you look at our tech to market team, of which there are about 20 of us, we all have private sector experience. Some folks are kind of like, let's say a later career, less hair on their head folks like me. And some folks are maybe a little earlier in career, but typically have at least 10 years of experience in the private sector. And I think, like me, folks have a real curiosity about engaging in public service, are attracted by the fact that we have this like wide mandate and we work on really cool stuff, and really like this idea of being this connector between technologists and all of those downstream stakeholders. But there's folks like me who've been at big corporates. Others have been VCs, founders, incubators, accelerators. Some have spent their life in the oil and gas industry, or in the aviation or power electronics. So just a breadth of life experience, sector experience. I know you want to ask your next question, but the other thing I'd mention too is we have a summer intern program that our Tech to Market team runs. So for like business school students or like master's students in energy policy.
I had a friend who I think was in that actually.
Yeah, it is a first off, when our summer scholars come in, it makes me wonder how I ever got into business school, because like these people are so much smarter and more polished than I am. It's amazing. But that is a fantastic program where people can work on a specific project, kind of one-on-one with an ARPA-E tech to market advisor, do a TEA for, the electrification of aviation, or a TEA for geologic hydrogen. And that's somebody's project for the summer, which is an amazing experience. And that should be going up late October, early November on the job posting for that. So people should keep their eyes and ears open.
Definitely. And for the record, I think you are extremely polished, and this conversation has been incredible.
Well,
so thank you again for taking the time. And now a few questions to just wrap up this really insightful conversation. Looking back at your time with ARPA-E, what's the most unconventional or surprising innovation that you've helped support? Something that challenged the status quo in an unexpected way. Doesn't necessarily have to be the most, but something that just comes to mind.
Well, it pops to mind, and I just think this is super promising, but I can't take credit for it because it's not a program I've worked on. And our program director, Doug Wicks, my colleague, Otan Montero from Tech to Market, and a number of other folks have really driven it. But I mentioned it a minute ago, geologic hydrogen. The idea that hydrogen is naturally produced in the subsurface of the earth, and that's happens due to a variety of naturally occurring phenomenon. That we've launched a program to look at. Okay, that happens, but how can we actually get better at stimulating subsurface hydrogen production so that it can really be harnessed? And if we can crack that challenge, this could be a real massive new source of primary energy. And that is, I think that's pretty cool. People have told me it's never going to work, but then that's why ARPA-E should be funding it. We need to take big, bold swings like that, right? And see if it could work. Because if it could, you could really unlock this, then that could be a game changer for especially in hard to abate sectors. So
that's awesome. Do you have one or two other potential examples? Because this is like the most cutting edge stuff. So super interested.
Neat stuff that I have worked on. We have a program. You're gonna laugh. It's called Gophers, and this is for powerline undergrounding. Again, creative acro naming. But
I'm definitely applying for a summer internship after hearing those acronyms alone.
Exactly right. You're gonna get your notebook
when you tie
going.
in this cutting edge work. It's just the ultimate combination.
So that one's neat, because if you think about electrify everything, right? If we get people to trust their building heat and their cars and their industrial processes to electricity instead of molecules, and then the power system isn't reliable, and in storms and extreme weather events take it out, then that bargain is going to kind of break down, right? People are going to say, wait a second, why did we sign up for that? And if you look at this country and our percent of power lines, both transmission and distribution, that are undergrounded, versus say Europe. We are, I think the stat is at around 20% underground at 80% above ground. And in Europe, it's almost flipped. And so that obviously in extreme weather, whether that's wildfires, in the West or hurricanes in the East, that needs to change in a world where we're more and more dependent on, electricity for our power needs. And so we've launched this program, Gophers, that is working on cheap. And so why aren't more power lines underground? It's just so expensive. So how do you make that cheaper with, high speed directional drilling for trenchless undergrounding, different kinds of ground, penetrating radar and other technologies that enable you to steer or direct a drill, from above ground and know where all of the, other buried infrastructure is so that you can move those drills fast. And if we can really crack that, then, we can get a much less expensive power line undergrounding. And that would be like a big, huge accomplishment.
One more, please.
So,
Partially to learn about the technology, but also hear the acronym.
Okay. So I was thinking of some that are just launching, but no acronyms yet.
That's okay. That's okay.
I mean, we are.
You spoiled us already.
We're launching. Again, not one I've been involved in. Colleagues like Bob Ledoux, Ben Weiner have done awesome work here on applying quantum computing to energy. So there are, 4 different, chemical processes in the, energy sector broadly. We depend on catalysts, right, to as part of, hydrocarbon reforming and, all sorts of, electrochemical processes. Discovering new materials and new catalysts and new compounds is difficult and historically has been a laborious, sort of trial and error in the lab. We're doing some work, just using AI, using conventional classical computing to discover new catalysts, new materials, but we're gearing up to launch a program that actually would apply quantum to tackle some of the hardest material discovery challenges that are just classical computing is too computationally inefficient to really solve some difficult material discovery challenges. So that's just neat because we're taking a cutting edge computing area, quantum, which itself is just really starting to get off the ground, and then applying it to, how can this drive new energy technologies faster?
So I
think that's a neat area.
That sounds really exciting. And I could not let you go without asking for your perspective on where you see potential convergence of AI and the climate technology space.
Yeah.
Are there any cutting edge or high potential areas where you could see AI really making a difference in this field?
Yeah. So, I mean, the debate you hear a lot is energy for AI, and that's how are we going to have enough power for all of these data centers and the higher power needs of the GPUs being used for AI processing. And that, so it's energy for AI or AI for energy. So taking the latter one of those, I think in material discovery, to sort of turbocharge or to compress some of that, what's historically been done with PhD students in the lab, and how do you start to do computational discovery using AI? I think that's an area of opportunity. I think in power system optimization, and we have some teams, that's an area I've been working on, in an increasingly The fancy term is stochastic, an increasingly variable world of generation, wind, solar. How do you maintain the power grid and reserve levels in the grid with the same consistency that we have in a historically deterministic, think conventional power gen world? And so we have teams who are using AI and machine learning for better, 7-day ahead forecasting of both load, of weather, and thus its impact on wind and solar. And so I think you're seeing a lot of interesting modeling there for better sort of power system planning and operation. And so that's another area. I mean, another area could be just using AI for modeling the grid as you bring on new resources and new transmission lines to help, kind of cut through this interconnection queue that you hear about. And I think there's potential for using AI tools for better sort of macro grid modeling to, enable, say, independent system operators to make better, quicker decisions around interconnecting, new renewable projects.
Amazing. I'm really, really grateful that you mentioned AI and talked a lot about the different innovative programs that are occurring at ARPA-E.
Oh, can I mention one other?
100%.
We have because this will be an acronym you like. Cooler Chips. And so Cooler Chips is a program, our PD, former GE colleague of mine, Peter DeBach, and our tech to market advisor, Brent Ridley, are working on. It's new technologies for more efficient data center cooling. So this goes more on the energy for AI side. Yeah, exactly. But we're doing some pretty neat work there on, how do you reduce the load of running a data center, and cooling's a big part of that.
Very cool.
Yeah.
And now coming to a close and shifting gears to more drawing from your past experience in investing and with ARPA-E to helping those who are now looking to enter the investing fields, learn from your incredible experience. Is there any advice you'd give to young investors who are just starting to explore the world of energy innovation? Specifically, are there mindsets or experiences or skills that you think are crucial for succeeding in such a quickly evolving field?
Yeah. No, I'm excited to give advice because I have two 20-something-year-old kids who don't want to take my advice. When I hear advice in young people, I'm like, oh, cool, maybe somebody will listen. So, when you're thinking about early stage technology companies, and this is probably going to be blindingly obvious, but, look for teams that have the technology passion, but that's almost always going to be there. But make sure their commercial mindset is cranked up. And that means, are they just really passionate about understanding their customers and, really going deep to know both what matters to a customer, but also how a customer makes money. So you can think about how this new technology that might be introduced will help a customer make money. Because these are generally B2B sales. So I'd look for teams that have that mindset. Teams that really know their TEA, techno-economic analysis, really understand how this product costs out at a unitary basis, CapEx, OpEx, and has done the homework there. I think looking for teams that are thinking downstream. So, are they thinking about their supply chains and, how, if they are successful, are they going to exhaust, or have require 50% of the world's supply of X? And are they, if so, that's a problem. So, teams should be really thinking about a resilient supply chain designed for manufacturability. If you're coming up with some new membrane, are you thinking about how that's going to be produced at volume, at scale? And you should be thinking about that early on, because if you're not, and you come up with an amazing technology that just can't be manufactured using existing capital equipment, it's like, okay, forget it. The world's not going to build new equipment just for you. Maybe it will, but
that would be the ultimate buzzkill.
Yeah,
Develop
exactly.
this incredible technology and then find out that can't be manufactured.
Just to go on that thread, let's say we're talking hard tech, not software. At some point, you're probably going to need project financing, either to build a factory, or if you're coming up with some new grid storage technology, project financing for that, big, 200 megawatt hour grid deployment, whatever it is. And so understanding project development, what that means, who EPCs are, what an off taker is, what's the role of insurance in that. And I think you want to look for teams that, even though they still may be early, they're thinking about, and maybe they don't know already, but at least they have the curiosity and, to be thinking about things like project development.
In your view, how important is it for young investors to have a technical understanding of the energy sector versus building strong partnerships and networks? How can they strike the right balance between the two?
Good question. So I come at this without a technical background. That actually makes me a bit unique in the ARPA-E world. And as I understand, it was a little bit controversial actually when I was brought aboard. I have a liberal arts background and then an MBA. I think you need to have, if you don't come at this with a technical background, you need to work harder to really understand things at least a basic level. Not at a PhD or probably even a master's level, but you're going to need to spend a lot of time, and I've done this, on really understanding how different energy technologies work. The good news is there's the internet. And so, you can dive in and do a lot of that. And I found I really had to do that. So I had that, base level appreciation. And I think that's important. I think for me, where I've been successful in my career though, is, I always loved science, in college, I took science class. In high school, my high school biology teacher was super disappointed that that's not a career I went into, you know what I mean? So, I think if you've got to like science, but then you do need to work harder if you don't have a technical background. I was gonna say, I think where I've been good is translating, technical speak into business speak and what matters to non-technical folks, and being that translator. And I think that's at least for me, that's been a kind of a skill set that's worked well. And then the other thing is, and this comes with time, is building networks and being a connector. And I think that has served me really well. And I think if you're going to be a connector, just connect people for the sheer joy of saying, oh, this person is doing something good and it's relevant to that person, and I'm going to put them together, and nothing expected out of it. And I think if you take that mindset and you're always looking for how can I just met this person, doing, renewable offtake insurance, and they relate to this person I know who's working on, literally an example from Climate Week this week, Caribbean nation energy resilience. I'm going to put them together. And, I get nothing out of it really, but having that connector mindset, I think, goes a long way. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's
that answers
my
it
2
really
cents.
well. And when you evaluate early stage energy companies, what red flags or warning signs should young investors be mindful of, especially in this quickly evolving field? And I would just like to add a addendum to this question, which, drawing from your past experience, are there any hard lessons that you've learned in your own journey as an investor that you think people now entering the space could learn from, and that you in some ways wish you had known entering?
Yeah. So good. So on the red flags, especially in energy tech, I mean, I touched on them a little earlier, but teams have to have like their unit, especially early on, their unit economics just nailed. Maybe they haven't thought through the full project development, project financing, but having that techno-economic analysis done, knowing unit economics and how those change over time as volume increases. I mean, you really need to see teams have that appreciation. I think having that commercial headset and, fall out of love with your technology and like just fall in love with your customer and knowing what your customer ticks. Teams that have, this is talked about all the time, but that ability to pivot and to test things and see if there's product market fit, and if there's not, can they move? And I think pushing teams on how have they pivoted, how have they tested one thing and gone in a different direction, and getting a sense of that, I think is important.
Because it's pretty inevitable, essentially.
I mean, maybe you get lucky, right? That like you just keep a straight line down the highway, but more often than not, that's not going to happen. I mean,
especially when it's so early.
We have a fast charging team we funded that's just, they've been acquired by ABB. And we funded them originally, and they were focused on electric motors, new power electronics for electric motors. And then they pivoted into DC fast charging, just because they, for a variety of reasons, realized that was the better direction to go. So, I think if a team is just locked in, no, this is the idea, this is the customer. I mean, that to me would be a for sure red flag. I mean, on like things I've learned the hard way, in between, being at GE for 16 years and then being at National Grid, I tried my hand, I wanted to scratch my itch in tech startups, and, rather, I think I got a bit scratched, but a lot of learning. We were actually lucky, and one thing I did to have a significant customer early on, which at the time seemed great and it was like de-risking, but it actually, I think it bred some complacency. Like if you get out of the gate and you're lucky to have a big customer, don't let that make you complacent, because I think it stopped me from really focusing on the right business model. Because it's like, hey, we've got these guys. We'll always have these guys. Well, you have them until you don't, which was our case. And then it's like, oh, yeah, we haven't figured out the business model. So that's one thing. As an investor, early on in my J's and GE, avoid momentum plays. Like, I remember we invested in like a content delivery network in the early 2000s. And, there was Akamai and Sandpiper. These are names you probably may not recognize, but, all getting funded, big valuations. Oh, let's do another one. I think just be very careful of like those. Lots of money's going into the sector. So that kind of momentum investing.
FOMO.
FOMO is, we felt like we had to do a deal there. So we did, be careful of that. Yes. Investing FOMO bad. So.
Another acronym.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, thank you, Jon, for sharing all of these incredible insights. We're running at over an hour. That's very rare, and it's just a signal that you have so much great experience and incredible knowledge, and I appreciate you taking the time to share that with all of us today. Thank you.
Well, thanks for having me. You're kind. It could also mean I just talk too much, but no, this is a lot of fun.
No, because I couldn't stop asking questions.
You go.
Thank you.
Thanks.
That was so good. Thanks so much for checking out the Zenergy Podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please take a moment to rate and subscribe to the podcast. It would mean so much to me and the rest of the team. We release episodes every Thursday, so stay tuned for all new episodes featuring industry leaders building a cleaner, greener future for us all. See you next time.